Production, elite sires. So as we said before, for sires, it's greater than or equal to the 85th percentile for a year in production eval, listed by breed. The list year can be chosen from 2000 onward. So this is the way the elite sires looks. This might be a good place to start if you're interested in productions. You get a really good listing of which ones taken into account for milk, fat, and protein are ranked high as far as percentile ranking. And you can see the first two are 99 percentile, the next two are 98, and then 97 percentile. So, these might be good ones to look at. Reliabilities are kind of mid-range on most of these, so they probably do have need a little more data to really flesh them out a bit, but this is a good place to look for another take on possible sires. So going on to the type side, you can look at one trait at a time. And again, you have the standard breed query filters, and you have some special list by filters. The one that I find most useful is traits user range. This way, depending on your personal preferences, you can set a trait range, kind of like the ideal range, and see what sires might provide positive improvement in those particular areas. So you can pick one trait at a time, and then set a window for user range. And when we get to the example, I'll show you a little bit more about what that readout looks like. Best PTA, kind of similar, but what it does is it finds the most positive PTAs. You shouldn't be looking at PTA alone. You need to look at the trait averages of daughters for a particular sire as well, because you can have a sire with kind of a low trait average for a particular trait, but a high PTA, which is better than nothing, but you want a starting point or an average for that sire that is more in the range that you're looking for. And then if you're logged in to ADGA Genetics, you can use sire compare here and look at saved sires that you have in My Genetics as far as how they compare on traits. So this is kind of what it looks like. Again, this is, when it first comes up, it looks at final score average. The trait that it's looking at is final score. And here you can see it's in descending reliability again. Not too useful. Final scores, although ADGA puts a lot of emphasis on final score, it actually is the most subjective part of the appraisal program. Looking at the linear traits that can actually be measured and put on a scale of 0 to 50 makes a whole lot more sense. So if you want to look at the traits, for example, a question I get all the time, what's a good buck for improving levelness of rumps on Nigerians? So this is the way I would set this up. Choose rump angle for the trait. set a user range 30 plus or minus 5 and see what comes out. So you can see there's a number of animals on here. None of them have a whole lot of data. Reliability is kind of mid-range. But what you would look for would be, and you can see I also sorted this by descending trait average. So here we have the highest in this range sorted descending. And what I'd look for would be like something with a high trait average and a positive PTA. Positive PTA is means it's more likely to transmit that particular positive improvement to its offspring. You know, as opposed to something like this, which has a reasonable trait average, but might have a negative influence on that trait.
Can you say more about that? If the daughters have a high average, where's the negative from? Does that take into account what the dam had or what?
I didn't catch that completely.
I'm just going to have her come down, but I want to make sure her question is correct.
Okay.
Down and be closer to the speaker.
Can you say a little bit more about how you get a negative PTA when the trait average for the daughters is pretty much the same? Like, is that taking into account the different influence of those dams, how much the sire is improving over them, or what?
The PTAs, like we talked about earlier, is calculated from parents and relatives, from progeny. There's a lot of factors that go into it. And all this is saying on these first two animals, they have similar trait averages, fairly similar. But one, you can expect more positive improvement, and one, you have a slight decrease in the value of that trait. And arriving at these numbers is fairly complex, and it all depends on how much evaluation data is behind these particular sires, how many daughters, how many herds. There's a lot of factors that go into it, but this is the best we can do from the data that we have. So if I had a choice between a sire that had a similar trait average for a particular trait, and one with a positive PTA and one with a negative PTA, I would go with the one with a positive PTA. There are a couple of exceptions to that, because not all the values for desirable traits move in that direction. For example, teat size. The positive PTA on teat size means that teats will be increased in size. Whereas, that might be great if you're hand milking and you want that to happen, but for people that machine milk, it might be better to have an average, 0 or even a negative PTA if you're trying to decrease the size of teats. So it all depends on the trait. And we can look over the traits. That might be a good thing to do, and you can get a better idea of which way they need to go. Let's see, let me see if I can. So let me share this out. Okay. So you'll probably, can you see this?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, so this is what you, an information sheet you get with your linear appraisal materials. And this goes through all the linear traits and the scoring ranges for the traits. So, you know, there's strength, daringness, rump angle. You know, steep rumps are kind of unsightly. Probably where you want to be is mid-range to maybe a little bit higher. You don't want something that's above the 0-degree angle. Rump width, you probably can't have too much rump width. Rear leg side view, you don't want them too posty. You don't want them too angular either. Four-udder attachment. Rear udder height. You know, some of those, as high as you can get, are good. Others, you know, mid-range are better. So getting familiar with the trait ranges and what your particular goals happen to be. You know, I think teat diameter was probably one of the ones where an ideal range was set and people got really upset with it because, you know, the hand milkers like big teats, small teats are too hard to milk. Ones right in the middle of the range are good usually either way. But this is one where a more positive PTA would give you bigger teats, and if what you wanted, because you machine milk, is smaller or have them remain the same, then you probably would want to go in a different direction. So, you know, some of it is personal preference, but there's a lot of these traits where you could probably come up with an ideal range of where that goat should be for productivity and longevity. So I'm gonna share this out again. So did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's another way to look at this. You can compare raw linear appraisal trait scores for a sire. It also lets you compare the structural data as well. And again, you can find that sire with the same kind of method that you use for plan pedigrees. It's a lot of numbers to look at, but it can be helpful if you're interested in looking down the actual scores. So this is what it looks like. You know, if you're looking at rump width, you can see, you know, there's some pretty high ones here. Couple of outliers. You know, I think they've gotten much better at measuring rump width. They have a better tool now. So hopefully those those numbers will get a little more consistent. Some things like stature, I almost put no stock in those because especially if you have ones that aren't leading very well and they hunker down, they can't get a good stature reading on them. So that's probably one of the most inconsistent traits on here. Some of them are a little more subjective than others. You know, they're not really measurements, but just comparing to the trait range. But for the most part, the trait scores are really important. And on here, you can see the ones in italics are permanent scores for does. So pedigree planning, this is probably one of the pages that gets used the most after the pedigree pages. It's great for doing what ifs on pedigree matchups, but it also, I think last year I added some extra features where it allows you to compare evaluation data as well. So you can format this page for printing if you want to print it out. Also, that link that appears when you do a format page for printing can be used to show planned breeding on the web, on ADGA Genetics. And also there's a button on the planned breeding for Save to My Genetics. This will actually save that planned breeding for later recall, and you won't have to go through the putting in the sire, putting in the dam, and generating again. So here's a planned pedigree example. And you can see there's this drop-down box over on the left-hand side. It's set to pedigree. This is the one you're normally used to. Shows sire pedigree, dam pedigree, whether there's a ETA, which can be calculated on unborn, unregistered animals, and the inbreeding, planned breeding, inbreeding percent. And here's the Save to My Genetics. So if there is evaluation data, there's an option called prod compare. And what this will do, it'll take the does evaluation, production evaluation, and the sire's evaluation. And what I do, you know, it's probably a faulty assumption, but just to kind of get a general idea of what you might expect, I add these two together and divide by 2, and that's the number that I get here. So you can see between these two animals, I should get a positive improvement in milk production, fat percent, protein, and protein percent. You know, for production breeding, this is a good one. So as far as a type evaluation type compare, here's the sire's trait average for each trait, the dam's trait average for each trait, the sire's PTA, dam PTA, and then the combined. And I do the same thing there where I just add the PTAs together and divide by 2. So, you know, you might want to compare these side by side and see what you're going to get and what you might give with a breeding like this. So, four-udder attachment, you know, that's pretty close. Rear udder height, little less rear udder arch maybe from the sire, little more udder depth from the sire. little smaller teats from the sire, which for me would be desirable. And you can see there's a fairly high PTA for that as well, which, you know, for this particular doe, she's a really nice doe, but she has teats that are a little on the larger side, and I'd like to get them down. So, you know, on production, this looks good. On type, you know, it looks like he's not going to really trash her, may even do some positive improvement on the udder. So there's a lot of things to look at when you have evaluation data. It kind of gives you another perspective on the whole breeding process. I know breeding two really nice looking animals together is probably the easiest way to do it, but you know, if you can get this extra dimension in there, you might want to rethink some of your breedings. So my genetics. This one, it's a feature where you have to create an account on ADGA Genetics, and the accounts are free and personal data is never shared. Log in, and my genetics links are in the upper right-hand corner of all pages. Looks like this. Once you're logged in, Save to My Genetics button appears on the goat detail pages and the planning pages, and allow you to save them in your particular account. So here you can see this is what my page looks like when I'm logged into ADGA Genetics. So one thing to keep in mind, there's various problems that people have, and I can usually deal with these fairly easily. If you remember your username but can't log in, you can have a reset password sent to your email. That reset password is usually pretty cryptic, but you'll need it to get into your account. And once you get into the account, you can change it to something you can remember. So if you can't remember your username or your email address has changed, you have to contact me, because I have no way of getting you back into your account unless I do special things. So My Genetics has the following features. You can save pedigrees and plan breedings. You can group your saved pedigrees, and the groupings containing bucks can be used in sire compare on the production and type pages. That's really helpful. So here's what the My Genetics page looks like. These are all animals that I've saved over the years. Have a date when they were added, has their date of birth, whether they have evaluations or not, and how they were grouped. So I only have a few groups listed, and I'll show how you can create whatever groups you want. Planned breedings. Any planned breedings that you save, you can easily recall by just clicking the link, rather than have to re-enter the sire and the dam. Very, very helpful. Groupings. You can create any number of groupings that you want and manage them from here. I have AI sires. I have a number of bucks in my tank, and I like to kind of keep them in a group so I can see how they work on various does. Current bucks, those are the ones I have live on the place. Current does, the ones out in the barn. Sire compare, You know, I can move different sires in this group when I want to compare them on the production or type pages. And the last option is the multi-planned breeding. This is really helpful. If you have a particular doe you want to get, you know, check or compare breedings on, you can compare her to a group of sires. In this case, I had AI sires. And what it does is it creates a list of the planned breeding links to the planned breeding page, or formatting the page for print. So clicking any one of these will go directly to that page. If I was to do this one at a time, it would take me forever. So I don't know how many of you have discovered this particular option, but it is really helpful if you have a bunch of bucks and a bunch of does and you kind of want to figure out evaluation wise what the best crosses might be. This will give you kind of an easy way of doing that. So that's most of the presentation. The whole point of this was to get familiar with the evaluation data, what it means and how to use it, to set breeding goals and use a strategy to attain them. You know, rather than just do hit and miss, have a plan. I think your results will be much more to your liking if you do that. And get familiar with the available tools, when and how to use them effectively. And lastly, get your breedings done, cross your fingers, and hope for the best. I mean, that's what it always comes down to, because you never know what you're going to get until you get it. And it may not be when it hits the ground. It may be 3 or 4 years down the road. So just bear in mind, this is a long-term process. It's not really good for people that want instant gratification. This takes time to do it right. So with that said, anybody have anything they want to see more in depth? I can go into ADGA Genetics and actually run some live demos if you like.
Here's the My Genetics tab. Is that, so if you log in, is that under kind of the menu of different options?
Well, I'll go ahead and show you.
I haven't seen that one. Are you set yet?
So let me share this out here. Okay, can you see that? Are you there? Hello?
Yeah, we are here.
Oh,
Here.
okay. So here's ADGA Genetics, and you can see from this line right here. Let's see. Let's see if I can get a pointer. No. Okay, so you can see from this top line here, I'm logged in as guest, which means I'm not logged in. So if I choose log in, I'm going to log in with my account.
Now, is that your ADGA account, or is that a different one?
This is one that's specific for ADGA Genetics.
If you don't have that, or if you're not sure if you have that.
Yeah, it's separate.
Never mind.
So you can see up on this top line, if you don't have an account, you can click the join button, and that'll go through the process of creating an account for you. So I'm going to log in. You can see now this top line has changed to log out, change password, and my genetics. So if I go to my genetics, these are my pedigrees that I've saved, my planned breedings. I click on any one of these, and what I get is the planned breeding page formatted for printing directly rather than to have to go through the planned breeding process.
When you're signed in and then you do a planned pedigree, is there an add button? Like, is it that Save My Genetics button on a planned breeding?
Yes. So let me go back. So if we do planning, do you have a sire that you want to use?
Well, I would say I can never search for your sires, and I don't know why, because if it's the apostrophe, so why don't you use Charles Atlas? But I can never get him on my cell phone.
Oh, because of the apostrophe. You know, one trick for this, you don't have to use the herd name part of it. Let's say an old buck I had was Donatello, and he was, so it can come up that way.
Okay. I thought you had to start with the herd name.
Nope.
Caracal, there's a hyphen in Caracal for our kind of later animals. So I have a hard time doing planned pedigrees on Charles Atlas. So
yeah, so for Atlas, you can just do Charles Atlas. Yeah, I try and type as little as possible, and the way this is set up, it'll find after you type the first 3 characters, it'll find anything that matches. So you just have to type in enough so a few come back and you can choose. So Atlas and yeah, these are old ones, but we'll just do one. So if we generate, so this is what you get for a planned breeding, and you can see it shows save to my genetics. So if I do a save and then go back to my genetics, and when you first add them, they'll come back as ungrouped. So if you come in here and look at ungrouped, oh, maybe she didn't save. That's interesting. Of course, she's probably there already. No, I don't know why that didn't do it. It usually does. Oh, because that was a planned breeding. There we go. So this is the planned breeding I just did, and this is the one to Cherry Amour. So they do show up in my genetics under my planned breedings. I just wasn't looking in the right place. So you notice when I'm doing a find for a pedigree, using the percent sign is a wild card. It's another way for me to not type as much. So if I look at the pedigree on this and do a save to my genetics, and then go back to my genetics and look at ungrouped, there she is. So I'm going to create a group here called MDGA. And you can see it shows up here in my list of groups. If I go back to my saved pedigrees, go to edit this, change the group. And now if I look at MDGA, she shows up there. Or if I look at my current does, they show up. Or current bucks. So it's a really handy way of not having to go through the process and go through the pedigree pages to search, or go through the planned breeding page to put in sire and dam every time. It just makes it a lot easier. So the part I really like is the multi-planned breeding. So if you have a particular doe that you want to see, let's say Angelique, and you want to see which of the current bucks might work best for her. You can do a generate, and you get a list of possible breedings here with the bucks that are out there. So let's say I want to look at Buster Brown and Angel.
That's kind of listed in your current buck, so you could add, say, whatever you have in your tank, and have them kind of saved there.
Yeah. So as you can see,
Okay.
well, that's not right. So current does, let's say I do that same one, and AI sires. So I have a bunch of old dead bucks in the tank, and some others not from my herd. And this would be a good way of doing the planned pedigrees on those as well. You can group them any any way you like. One thing that you can look at, production bucks. You can see now the sire compare option shows up for the page. And it'll look in your My Genetics saved groups and see which groups have bucks in them and which ones have evaluations on them. So AI sires comes up first. So these are ones I have in the AI sire list. And you can compare their various milk traits side by side. And you can put whatever you like in these various groups. Current bucks, I only have 2 with evaluations. They're pretty low, but I think it's more a reflection on not having that performance data built up over generations, because they do milk fairly well. And so there's some in the sire compare group as well. It seems to me that, just looking at this data all the time, there's seems to be more of the really old sires with high milk and component PTAs, and I'm not exactly sure what that's about. A lot of them don't have a whole lot of data, but I think it has something to do with who was on test a long time ago when this evaluation process first started. And somehow I think there's a bias built in for those particular ones and high PTAs. But it looks a little strange. Definitely the ones that have more evaluation data behind them with their parents and relations, you're going to get better data. I've noticed the ones that I've had that have been consistent milkers for a number of generations now, their PTAs are gradually creeping up now. But it takes time. Any other questions? Anything you'd like to see?
Someone's coming down to talk closer to the microphone.
Okay.
Jean, I had a question about the type evals that are on the individual pedigree pages. And especially as a Nigerian breeder, I try to wrap my head around the fact that the Nigerians are mixed in with all the other breeds. So do you have any advice on how to get the most out of that? Because I'm sure you know there's not very much data on Nigerians. So how can we use your tool?
Well, not having a lot of history, it's going to take probably years to really build up enough to make the data really meaningful. But there is some there, and you should be able to use it really the way it is. Do you have an animal you want me to look up for an example?
Try Dynamo Falcon Zigzag.
I didn't catch that.
Yes, try Zigzag.
Zigzag?
Z-I-G-G. No, it's all one word, Z-I-G-G.
Z-I-G-G.
Yep, Z-A-G. Watch, I'll probably pick them up. And then, there should be Dynamo. Oh, we need a sire. We're looking for bucks here.
Yeah.
You got X on doe.
Oh, these are all does, excuse me.
Yeah.
There you go.
So the top one. And then looking at his type eval. So okay, make sure I'm understanding this right. So those are negative PTAs, but like his daughters don't, they appraise really well. So I'm trying to match trait averages against like within the Nigerian breed versus against, you know, the Alpines and all the other standardbred breeds that have much higher trait averages as a whole as a breed. So how do you like take this down to the Nigerian level versus the standard breeds?
Well, yeah, you know, I don't know what the issues are as far as appraisals on Nigerians as opposed to the standard breeds, but you know, as far as the evaluations you have, you can only work with, you know, what you have in the way of data, and you can see, I think, general trends of what you might get in each individual trait, like udder height. Well, I mean, there's only 4 appraisals, 3 daughters for this. So,
example, can you just go to like the top Nigerian bucks and just pick one of the very top Nigerian bucks for type?
we can do that.
That might make more sense.
So we're going to do Nigerians. What am I on here? That's production. So
yeah, just pick one of them.
So we're, let's see, that's kind of an old one. Somebody with a little, well, these are the most reliable. I'll just do button heads here. Up, not a whole lot of pedigree information there. Yeah, these are probably all transferred over from AGS. Yeah, you know, it's a problem when CDCB doesn't have complete pedigree information. You know, it's hard to do the calculations.
Eval. Like, so what does that mean when you click type eval if you don't have a full pedigree information? Is it just basing everything on 0?
I'm not exactly sure what they do. They may just use average, you know, well, they don't even have the relatives, you know, on one side or the other. So it may be difficult to do a proper calculation for the evaluation. I mean, that might be a problem.
Can you just pick the chart on one of them? Yeah, like that one. Like, look at type eval.
Okay. Yeah, this one looks a little more complete.
Okay, so now this is one of the top animals in the breed, and there's an awfully lot of negative numbers in there for PTA. Wouldn't you expect that to look different for a top animal?
Not necessarily.
I would say an example of that might be somebody like Charmer, where, and I guess it's more production, but he's like one of those top animals that, you know, is 2-time national sire, but in terms of his transmitting ability, more regards to production, it might be really low.
But these are sorted on type. I'm just trying to, I mean, I'm not arguing with the numbers. I'm just trying to understand that. I have a hard time wrapping my head around if I sort by type and I pick the top buck and it looks like that.
Well, I think what this is telling you is you know, it's hard to get improvement in these various traits with the data on the animals that are out there now. There isn't anything with really a clear positive PTA for these particular traits. Let's do this a different way. If we do type, bucks, user range. So what's a trait that Nigerians in general need? What's that?
Like we were just saying, like you take a good rump on a Nigerian is still a bad rump when compared to an Alpine or a Saanen or something. So those charts, because they pool the standard breds with the Nigerians, it's hard to get a true view of how your animals are stacking up against other Nigerians.
Well, you can do that through the evaluations here, even though maybe they don't compare with Alpines or Saanens or Togs. They are compared within their breed. So like for rump, is rump width a problem or rump angle?
I think it's rump angle.
Okay, so if you do rump angle, if I set the range up as high as it'll go, so what we'll get is rumps 35 to 40 in the trait range. There are none. So, you know, I would have to drop that down. I think the best you can do is try and find the records, the evaluations that are in a trait average range that makes sense to you, that also have a positive PTI. And there are ones out there. So here's trait average. If I was to sort these by PTIs, I mean, you know, there's some in here that probably would be good candidates if you were looking to improve rump angle. You know, it's not that they're all negative. There are positive ones out here, but they're probably not as many as if the breed had been appraised for generations and had complete pedigree information. See, you know, for rump width, you don't have a whole lot of choices in this range, but there are some with positive PTAs. Rear udder height. It looks like there are some ones with fairly high rear udder height, but none with positive PTAs. That's interesting. So, you know, I don't know what to tell you except hang in there. You know, participate in the programs. It's not an overnight thing. You need to get some generations of animals behind you, fill out those pedigrees, and you know, get those animals appraised and tested. That's the only way it's going to happen. That's what improvement is all about, you know, and you're starting out, you know, with kind of a blank slate. You know, there hasn't been a whole lot of history here. So one thing, I don't know, Nigerian, rump angle. This is another thing you could look at to kind of get an idea of where the breed is going. And it looks like, you know, initially in 2005, it started out kind of on the low side for rump angle. And I don't know what changed in the appraisal program here, probably, but it's remained fairly constant. There really hasn't been a whole lot of improvement for whatever reason.
Do you think part of that could be that, I don't know, if within a breed it's hard to improve, sometimes it can be improve rump width with by breeding up. If you have an American, if you do a cross to a breed that, say, like sonnets that traditionally have wide rumps, and then you over the years now have American sonnets, and so you can bring in a rump width by introducing a different breed, but you obviously can't do that with Nigerians.
Yeah, they seem pretty set in their ways, and it's going to take some really careful breedings to get improvements. But I think once it reaches a critical mass and you find sires to make those improvements or changes in the breed, then things will happen. But it looks like, for certain traits, you're only going to have a limited pool of sires that are at this point in time shown to do those improvements.
Is that number above there, is that like a 27.58, or is that the number of animals, like 2,758, that are within that?
27.58 is the trait average for the breed. And we can see, like, if you go to Alpines, it's slightly higher. It's kind of interesting to see how these trend over time. There's a lot of information out here. It's kind of hard to pick through, and I know on the ADGA Genetics Facebook page, I get a lot of questions from Nigerian breeders about what it all means, and there's no simple answer. More data means, better calculations is about all I can say at this point in time. Nigerians, they're different than the standard breeds, and they do get kind of graded on the same scale as the standard breeds. So I don't know what the solution is to that. Based on the evaluation data, you can, for each trait, pick out a respectable trait average and find ones with positive PTAs and try and use those to get improvement if that's what your goal is, for each trait. But you have kind of slim pickings.
Anybody else have questions? Is there anything else you wanted to cover?
I don't believe so. If I've covered pretty much all I wanted to. Just make the point of considering breedings based on genetic evaluations as another tool in your toolbox for decision making. I know a lot of it comes down to this one's in heat, got to get them bred, just do it. But it's nice to have a little insight into what's going on and maybe make a little more informed decisions. This information is out there. It's ready to be used, and I think it'd be really helpful in meeting your goals and whatever they may be for breeding your goats.
Well, thank you, Dean. I would imagine people can contact you if they had further questions about staying on it.
Sure, and there's a Facebook page for ADGA Genetics, and we get some pretty lively discussions going on there as well. But it's always nice to do presentations like this to give people a little more firsthand insight, because there's a lot in the application. And like I was saying, web statistics show that these evaluation parts of the application just don't get used as much as I would like. They're really powerful tools, and you know, I know it's fun to look at pedigrees and go back into the old stuff and all of that, but you only get a limited insight into what's happening by looking at pedigrees. Looking at the numbers behind the traits is really powerful.
All right. Well, thank you, Gene.
Okay, it's been a pleasure, and have a good rest of the day.
Yep, you too.